Hey y'all, welcome to France. We are in Nice right now. We flew in yesterday morning. We're still pretty jet lagged, but not nearly as jet lagged as we were yesterday. So this is part of our French and Italian Riviera vacation, and we have a pretty packed day today. We are going to go to Ez after spending some time on the beach, and then we're going to go to Monaco in the evening. So we just had some coffee. Yeah, welcome to Nice.
It's so nice to finally be swimming in the Mediterranean. I grew up on the Redneck Riviera in Pensacola, Florida, which extends from Biloxi, Mississippi to Panama City. And ironically enough, we are staying at the Hotel Beau Rivage, which, there's a famous casino back in Mississippi known as the Beau Rivage, which was formerly the Boats. So anyways, I wanted to swim in the Mediterranean the last time I was here, but didn't get the chance. So this is really exciting. Okay, so I want to give just a bit of a review of the Côte d'Azur compared to other beaches we've been at. The Côte d'Azur is primarily a pebble-based beach. It's a little painful getting in and getting out. It's a bit slippery, but you don't have to really worry so much about plant life, so that means you don't have to worry about marine life coming up and swimming next to you. So that's kind of a major detraction compared to places like Hawaii, where you get a lot of reefs with a lot of interesting marine life. Now, one particularly interesting thing about this is that it's a really orically interesting place to be at, because the Pebble Beach doesn't just have the sound of the waves, but it also has this rock tumbler type sound of all the pebbles beating and breaking against the shore after the waves, which is really kind of interesting. And the waves kind of have this like tide pool kind of effect or wave pool kind of effect, maybe comparable to what you feel at a theme park. Overall, in my rankings of beaches, it would probably go Gulf of Mexico, this beach, Pacific Ocean, especially near reefs, and then Atlantic, because the Atlantic really doesn't offer anything and it's cold.
I swam in the Riviera as well, and it was very nice.
I really enjoyed our time at the beach. We were there for about 2 hours. I read a book, and Robert swam for a while, and then he made it look so fun that I swam, and it was really fun. I don't normally swim at beaches, but this was definitely worth it. The water was really warm, and it was just like the waves are really gentle, so I could just kind of like bob along, and it was very nice. We did a beach pass through our hotel, which was kind of pricey. It was about 25 euros a person. However, the beach passes in Italy are far, far more expensive, like 50 to 100 euros a person. So if we were gonna do a beach pass, this was a good place to do it. And I think it was worth it because we got to sit under an umbrella and we just had like a quiet space, and we had these beds to lay on, which was super nice, especially with the pebbles and everything. So we have showered, I've put on my black dress, and we are going to Ez, and then from Ez we're going to Monaco. And I have a change of shoes because they have a dress code there that prohibits sneakers, and Robert's gonna change his whole outfit because none of his outfits have the dress code, so stay tuned to see what Robert wears.
We found that the best way to get from Ez, from where we were staying in Nice, was to take an Uber. The Uber drive took about 25 minutes. We got lunch at a small family-owned restaurant that served focaccia and fresh squeezed juices. I got a grapefruit and lime juice, and we both got fluffy, cheese-covered focaccia with fresh greens and balsamic dressing on top. It was delicious.
Ez was a strategically important fortified village throughout much of its history. Its location, 427 meters above sea level, led it to being used as a stronghold by the Greeks, Phoenicians, Romans, Moors, French, and Turks throughout its long history. The historic medieval city is still preserved today, and in addition to this, there is a large perfume factory owned by the Fragonard Parfumeur Company, which appears to be the primary industry of the town.
It's quite lovely, it really is.
The main attraction in Ez is to walk through a variety of modern art galleries on the way to the world-famous Jardin Exotique at the very top of the hill Ez is built on.
Hey Robert, where are we walking?
Well, we wrapped up at the medieval city of Ez, which was entirely overcrowded, so we decided to take the path of Nietzsche down to the village of Ez, where the train station to Monaco and Nice is. And while Nietzsche lived in Ez, he wrote the book Thus Spake Zarathustra and developed the concept of nihilism as he walked up and down this hill every day to the village below.
So Robert says we're on the walk that inspired nihilism. I feel like this is a pretty good walk.
Yeah, I think the going up is the hard part.
You think that's what makes you nihilistic?
Yeah. It's very Sisyphean. Yeah, this makes me rethink nihilism, because Nietzsche's nihilism wasn't like everything's pointless. It was maybe even if religion's gone, you can find happiness and meaning by creating your own purpose and self-actualizing. And maybe just hiking this every day was his way of self-actualizing. Okay, so after our afternoon in Ez, we took the train over to Monaco, and right now we're in front of the Monte Carlo Casino. Anyways, the Monte Carlo Casino is super famous amongst mathematicians for a variety of reasons. First off, there was one famous game of roulette that inspired the Monte Carlo fallacy, the notion that after a long enough run, the opposite has to occur, in which people bet increasingly large amounts of money after black came up 23 times, and it turns out on the 24th time it came up black again, in a totally fair roulette wheel, causing a riot. So don't be superstitious. But more importantly, in the 1930s, Ukrainian mathematician Stanislaw Ulam developed a concept called Monte Carlo methods to analyze systems using statistical uncertainty to put, forecast bounds to put confidence intervals on your deterministic simulations, which is the basis of a lot of what you see in statistics, physics, originally nuclear reactions, looking at neutron transport in the atomic bomb, but then it evolved into certain things like hurricane forecast cone modeling heterogeneity and in ecology or genetics, and just kind of an area that I use pretty frequently. I think in my dissertation I cited the word Monte Carlo methods about 100 times, so I'm just excited to finally be at the location that inspired this. So tonight I'm going to attempt a gambling strategy known as the martingale betting strategy, where you bet increasingly large, you double your bet every time you lose on French roulette. So we can go into the math later, but basically the concept is French roulette is the closest thing to a coin toss or fair game, where there's only a 1 in 37 chance of the house actually winning. So the process is technically super martingale, which I'll define later, but it's as close to a martingale game as you can find. If you have a gambling issue, get some help, because we don't gamble on this channel, unless you count ripping Pokemon card packages open, but we're gonna gamble tonight.
Hey you viewer out there watching this chaotic travel vlog, you better be nice to Robert in this next part, because he worked really hard on it. It may be boring to you, but this is how we fund these travel vlogs, because I'm not the one that got a PhD in biomedical engineering. For clarity, we definitely do not fund these vlogs through gambling. We fund these vlogs through the fact that Robert does math for a living. So I just wanted to clarify that statement for y'all.
Anyways, this is Linnea's husband teaches math now.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah.
Note that the following segment of this video is only for entertainment or educational purposes about stochastic process models of casino games and does not constitute legal or financial advice. There's no gambling strategy capable of guaranteeing earnings or winnings in casino games. You will lose money on average. Further, the segment will demonstrate why even seemingly surefire strategies ultimately fail. If you or a loved one has a gambling problem or addiction, please contact the National Problem Gambling Helpline at 1-800-GAMBLER, 1-800-426-2537, or seek out a licensed mental health care professional. I had reread a lot of Chapter 5 of Rick Durrett's Essentials of Stochastic Processes on the train from Ez to Monaco, but I was still woefully unprepared for the Monte Carlo Casino. However, you can't help but feel like James Bond when you walk into the place. My game of choice that night was French roulette. The rules of roulette are relatively simple. After the ball has been put in motion, you're allowed to bet on an individual number for a payout that's roughly 36 times that number, or you're able to bet the first, second, or third 12 of the numbers for a 3 times payout, or you're allowed to bet the rail for odds, evens, reds, blacks, low or high numbers for a double of your bet. If it comes up 0 or double 0 depending on the table, the house wins. French roulette is unique in the sense that there's only single zeros compared to American roulette, which is double or triple zero. Let's consider 2 different roulette games. A fair roulette game on the left, where the win probability for red to come up is always 1/2, an American roulette game on the right, where there are 2 zero squares, 0 and double 0, where the probability of red coming up is 18 out of 38, or just a little bit under 1/2. That would be the same for black too. So that's actually the possibility of black or 0 or double 0 coming up. This can be modeled as a random walk, and we're going to color coordinate things as green if the final score is positive, or red if it's negative, or gray if it's neither. As you can see, if the probability is 1/2, everything stays neutral and forms a bell curve. If there is any asymmetry to the win probability, you get drift following the solid line in the middle, but it's still roughly a bell curve. So we can ask ourselves, how can we rigorously model this analytically? The probability of observing NW wins in NG independent games with win probability P is given by the following binomial distribution. It's given by a binomial coefficient of NG choose NW combinations times the probability of observing NW wins times the probability of observing NG minus NW losses in any non-specific order, from which we can calculate the average total earnings after NG games as the sum of the average payout of an individual game with bet size B. The probability of winning a game is given by P with payout B, and the probability of losing a game is 1 minus P with payout negative B, so the average winnings from a single game is B times the quantity of 2P minus 1. If we add that up over a variety of games, we get NG times B times the quantity of 2P minus 1. Now obviously in a casino game, we have two scenarios. We either have a fair game, which is a limiting case, where the quantity 2P minus 1 is 0, so the net winnings are 0, which doesn't exist, except when you're like playing with friends, or the scenario where P is less than 1/2 and the quantity of NG times B times the quantity of 2P minus 1 is less than 0, which describes a casino. So on average, you would expect your earnings from a roulette game to be either 0 or less than 0. And we can look at how these histograms would evolve over time. So the question is there actually any way to make money? The answer is almost, but ultimately a resounding not really. It only kind of works in the physics sense that a lot of Newtonian physics works if you assume a spherical frictionless cow, but unfortunately we live in a world where cows are not spherical and cows have friction. This strategy also does not work in the real world except for short, lucky stints where it doesn't break down, but ultimately on average if you play it long enough it will break down. The strategy that works best but ultimately fails is known as the martingale betting system. Let us introduce a new mathematical object called a martingale M sub n, which will represent the amount of money that we have at the nth game. We seek to find a strategy that satisfies the following conditions. First, the expected value of the martingale at the nth game must be less than infinity for all n greater than or equal to 0. The second condition is that the martingale must only be a function of the outcomes of the previous n games and its previous n values. And we expect there to be no difference between the martingale and its previous value on average conditional on the previous states of the system, or that there is no change in the martingale on average as a function of its previous path. Strategies where the martingale increases over time are called sub-martingale and don't exist in casino games since casinos wouldn't make money, and strategies where the martingale decreases over time such that the expected value of the martingale at game n plus 1 or less than the martingale at game n sub n are called super martingale and represent the reality of casinos since they are designed to cause you to lose money. Consider bidding red, black, or high-low on a fair roulette wheel. At time n equals 0, let us set our martingale at time 0 equal to 0. If we gamble one bet unit, our purse value at the end of the next turn will equal -1 or 1 with probability 1/2 for either respectively, so our average is 0. Thus the expected value difference is 0 minus 0 equals 0. Thus our martingale difference is stable, satisfying condition 3. Let's consider a second turn. For the second game, let's bet a single unit if the prior game was won, or double the bet if the prior game was lost. Our bet is 2 times bet 1 if we lost the last game, or it's the same as bet 1 if we won the last game. The potential outcomes for M2 are then 2 if we have 2 wins in a row, 0 if we won the first round and then lost the second round, 1 if we lost the first round and then recovered our bet with the second round, or -3 if we lost the first round and then lost our double bet. The expected value for M2 as a function of the previous steps is now 0. This once again satisfies condition 3 since the expected value of the difference between M2 minus M1 is still 0. The probability of a series of losses of length n sub l is 1/2 to the n sub l. At the same time, we know that our bets are doubling 2 to the n sub l. This means that the average value of the bets times the probability that we have to bet that much is equal to 1, so the average bet size stays constant. While we're not going to rigorously prove the induction step, this ultimately is why the bet strategy in the martingale stays stable. The next thing I'm going to show is that the total sum of prior bets up to this point is known to be the sum of 2 to the I times the original bet size, which we know to be 2 to the n sub l plus 1 times the original bet minus 1. Now, we know that the final bet is going to be 2 to the n sub l times the original bet, which when we double that for our winnings gives us 2 to the n sub l plus 1, and we subtract our total losses, we're left with 1 original bet unit. So we are guaranteed that in our worst case scenario, when we have our longest chain of losses n sub l, to recover our original bet. So this is really interesting because while we haven't rigorously demonstrated that the strategy is martingale, you're going to have to take my word on it, otherwise this video is going to be super long because we're going to have to invoke the binomial theorem and rigorously do the induction step. It appears to be martingale, yielding a neutral value over time, with a betting strategy that is quote-unquote guaranteed, it isn't, to recover one minimum bet unit. However, this is contingent on the following unrealistic assumptions. You need a perfectly fair roulette game with no house edge. You can't have that because casinos would go out of business. They're there to make money. You need to be in possession of an arbitrarily large amount of money in order to make exponentially doubling bets every time you lose, and you can't encounter a table limit. Now, let's say you're a degenerate who wants to try to do this because you're convinced that you're going to beat the odds.
I gotta figure out how to make money on this thing. It's simply too good. Gotta figure out how to make money on this. I really want to.
I've run simulations to show you what would happen. In the next section, I consider the classic gambler's ruin problem, but in the context of the martingale strategy. I assume that the player starts off with 127 times the table minimum bet and have normalized his wealth to the table minimum bet. This means that he can lose 7 games in a row at the start of the simulation before going bankrupt, since he can bet the following sequence: 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, and 64 times his original bet, which sums to 127 times the table minimum bet. As we can see, the expected value of his winnings grows linearly with the number of games times the probability that he wins the game, so at best, half times the number of games for a fair roulette wheel. However, when his luck turns, the requirement to bet exponentially increasingly large bets leads to meteoric crashes in his overall wealth. By running the simulation to 20,000 Monte Carlo steps with 5,000 replicates, we construct an empirical hitting time distribution for when the gambler will go bankrupt for fair roulette, French roulette, and American roulette. Note that the empirical cumulative distribution function plotted here is on a log scale. Remarkably, the 1.4% and the 2.6% worsening of the win probability for French and American roulette relative to a fair roulette game have a surprisingly non-trivial effect on the outcome. The median player for a fair roulette game can last approximately 450 games in the absence of a table limit, while the median French roulette player and the median American roulette player can only last roughly 300 and 250 games respectively, even though the change in win probability are minuscule. Further, the fair roulette hitting time distribution does not even converge at 20,000 steps, with roughly 5% of players still capable of playing, while almost all French and American roulette players have been eliminated. In short, the longer you play with a finite cash supply, the more likely you are to bankrupt yourself, even though the strategy is quote-unquote guaranteed to recover your lost bet. However, this scenario is still too favorable for the gambler. In reality, the Monte Carlo Casino had even less favorable conditions since it imposed a table limit that was 100 times greater than the minimum bet. So once again, you have exactly 7 chances to recover your lost bet before you hit the table limit, since the 8th bet would be 128 times the minimum bet, and you will have lost 127 times the minimum bet in the process. Simulating this, you can once again see the rare but exponentially massive spikes to the table limit and bet size, and once again, the rare crashes in the gambler's wealth. Now we can likewise construct the hitting time for a gambler's bet to exceed the table limit, and the result is a rather satisfying confirmation of the theory of martingales. For a fair roulette game, the average gambler will hit the table limit on game 254. Since they win 50% of their games on average, they will have won $127. However, because of the table limit and their bet doubling strategy, they will simultaneously lose $127. Thus, as predicted by the theory of martingales, the strategy leads to no change in their expected wealth value over time, since their earnings equal their losses as predicted previously. However, here is the critical result. This is the expected average value for an ensemble of gamblers. The average gambler, and please note that the average does not equal the median for this model due to the skewness of the distribution, actually is in the 64th percentile of survival time. So 64% of gamblers on a perfectly fair roulette wheel do not even break even using this strategy. The results are even worse for French and American roulette, where the average hitting times are games 218 and game 188 respectively, with the average earnings for the average survival time players of 106 and 89 bet units respectively, giving net losses for these players of 21 and 38 bet units. Once again, that's only for players with the average survival time. That doesn't even take into account the much larger losses for players with shorter survival times, which are assuredly much closer to 127 bet units. So once again, in a real-world scenario, even with this quote-unquote neutral betting strategy guaranteed to recover your lost bet, allegedly, the house will always win, and there's no way in a real world to meaningfully implement this strategy. Don't gamble any money that you're not willing to lose. The house will always win, and I also lost.
So Robert misread the minimum bet amount. It was €5 to bet a particular number that you thought it was going to land on, but it was €20 to bet the rail. And so Robert had set himself a limit of €50 total, and it took a very short amount of time to go through €50 when he had to start with €20 on betting the rail. So he basically immediately busted, and we just spent the rest of the time walking around Monte Carlo Casino, people watching. There were people betting crazy amounts of money. It was just quite an interesting vibe. And they gave us drink tickets whenever we came into the casino. So I used my drink ticket to get a very fancy sparkling water, and the bartender presented it like it was a cocktail, and it made me feel very fancy. So that was our experience. This vlog was very chaotic. I don't think it's really reflective of our normal travel vlogs, but if you liked it, please subscribe for more, give it a like, give it a comment. And we actually just came back from another trip. So we have a lot of travel videos to share with y'all through the rest of 2025. So please subscribe if you want to see more of our travel experiences.
Or if you want to see more Linnea's husband teaches math.
Yeah, let us know if you want to see more Linnea's husband teaches math. I'll be curious about that.